Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Good Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. David Beers, and I'm excited to be here today with Dr. Josh Schiffman. Josh is a professor of pediatrics at the University of Utah and an adjunct professor in the Department of Oncological Sciences and is in the Division of Hematology-Oncology at Primary Children's Medical Center. He serves as the medical director for the high-risk pediatric cancer clinic at the Huntsman Cancer Institute, where he cares for children and families with inherited risk for cancer. But Josh, you have a really interesting background, and I just wanted to start just to give people a little perspective about you. So I did a quick introduction for you about being a pediatric oncologist. And so if people don't know what that is, that's a children's cancer doctor. And so how does one get motivated to become a cancer doctor for kids? And I know you have a really interesting story.
Yeah.
I'd love to have people hear that.
Yeah. So Dave, first of all, thank you for having me on the Good Medicine Podcast. It's a real privilege to be here, especially with you, who I believe epitomizes good medicine and how to make good medicine. I always say my origin story began when I was 15 years old. And I was actually diagnosed with a childhood cancer called Hodgkin lymphoma. And that thrust me into the world of medicine, good medicine or bad medicine. We can talk about that.
Yeah.
And I was treated. I was actually diagnosed, believe it or not, by my father, who's a medical oncologist. That's probably a topic for another podcast. Yeah. But so I began getting my treatments, and I said, you know what, I've learned something here, and when I grow up, I think I want to be a pediatric oncologist too, like the doctors who took care of me and saved lives. And so I got through what I refer to as my summer of R&R, rest and radiation.
Radiation,
right?
That's right.
I got through that, and we can talk a little bit about that because it turns out 35 plus years later, there were some side effects from that, which actually has contributed towards my passion for making good medicine for patients. But I grew up, went to medical school, did my training, and became a pediatric oncologist, all because really of my own experience.
Yeah. Well, that's got to be, incredible working with children with cancer, but being a cancer survivor yourself. What's it like being a 15-year-old and being told you have cancer? Like, what did you even realize what the magnitude of that was going to be in your life?
You do not realize it when it happens. And, I don't see patients anymore. I'm so busy with Peel Therapeutics and the other work I'm doing. But when I was seeing patients, I would sit with them and I would say, you have to be careful. One of the side effects of having cancer as a child is you may grow up to become a pediatric cancer doctor, just like I did.
That's great.
But yeah, it changes your world entirely. So when you're a kid, 15 or even younger, right, and your friends are out getting into trouble and having fun and taking life for granted, it's impossible for you to do that, right? Because every day becomes a gift, and it has to be a day that you're feeling good and you're not suffering from the side effects of your medicine. And I think one of the things that it really did to me, it gave me this impression of, it's not just getting better, it's getting better without toxicity, without side effects.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, that's, both of us are old enough. We're about the same age, but, we grew up very similar. My origin story with my grandfather dying of cancer the year that I was born, and that really motivated me to understand, because I had no relationship with my grandfather because he died when I was the year I was born. And then my mother getting colon cancer and dying of colon cancer. Cancer just has an interesting way of putting a big print on your life. And it's different than other diseases, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But it's tough to watch. I think most people associate cancer with suffering, and I think that's probably why it has that kind of impact. Is because it's so hard to watch people that you love and that you've been around that go through that kind of suffering. And part of the suffering, unfortunately, is the medicines that we use because we have to push people to the limit to actually get them to respond and to be cured or treated or to have some sort of a positive outcome. So we're old enough that I think when we started, you mentioned that the standard of care for your kind of cancer that you were diagnosed with, a lymphoma, was high dose radiation and probably some chemo with that as well. We watched, those were the old days, but unfortunately there's still a lot of that's still today, that we still use a lot of those drugs today.
Yeah.
And so your perspective on, you've kind of lived through, radiation and chemo, targeted therapy, immunotherapy, how have things changed in terms of how we treat patients?
Yeah, we changed the name.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
We're still seeing we just sort of switch out one side effect, one tolerability for now. We're getting much better.
Sure. Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I was at a conference recently of oncologists, and we were almost like a think tank, and we were discussing how, we may actually have the right drugs already. It's just trying to figure out the right combinations to use them in. One thing also is very striking. I've spent a lot of time in my career around sarcomas, right? Different than lymphomas, but sarcomas are often quite deadly. They affect teenagers, and young adults. We haven't come up with a new medicine that's really been approved in years. And I once heard a patient talk about how, someone diagnosed today with osteosarcoma or Ewing sarcoma is getting essentially the same treatment that someone 40 years ago was diagnosed. And I'm going to pull out, and for the viewers at home, but for the people listening, my cell phone, right? Yeah. So this is, I believe, an iPhone 15.
Yeah.
Right? So in the past 10 years, we've had 15 new iPhones, but not one new treatment for cancer for these kids, right? And that's unacceptable.
It really is. Yeah. It's frustrating too, because I think both of us are scientists at heart. I mean, we spend a lot of time in the lab thinking about and trying to figure out what is cancer, why does it do what it does, and how do we take advantage of any vulnerability that could exist because of the way that it grows and the way that it spreads through the body. And it's really frustrating that we feel like we've made a ton of progress in our understanding, but translating those understandings into real medicines it's a challenge. And there's a lot of reasons for it. It's not, people ask me all the time, why can't you just, take something from the lab and start treating people with it? And there's a lot of reasons for that. And we probably don't have the time to talk about all of those. But I think the other thing that I've realized about being a cancer researcher is we all are eternal optimists as well. Yes. Like we all are thinking tomorrow could be the day that we find the real key. And that's really what keeps us going, because in the context of a lot of disappointment, a lot of failure, a lot of making discoveries that never see the light of day. I mean, how do you keep going every day with all of that going on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was thinking about this earlier, Dave, and we really, we share this passion for, it's hopefully why we get along so well,
exactly.
Right? Is how do we translate the science to the patients? And, I've been fortunate to have this interesting perspective, this humbling perspective of taking care of patients, right? And some patients survive, which is wonderful. Other patients die right, in front of you, and that's horrible, especially when they're children. But in medical school, and even for the most part in graduate school and PhD programs, we're not taught how to translate, right? And I was thinking about this. The goal is somewhat different, right? So and we've had this experience within our own company, right? When you're doing scientific research in academics, of course we love academics, it's where we come from, right? Yep. I'm still involved in it as well. The goal is to make a discovery and publish. And it doesn't matter if there's a therapeutic window or index of the drug. It's just to discover, new knowledge, and it gets out there, and hopefully you get on the cover of Nature, Science, and everyone's talking about this great discovery. That's not enough to get a drug into a human patient, right? And I'm sure, like you, we've had to kill programs within our company, even though the science was exciting. There was not a path forward to develop a drug, right, to get IND enabling experiments and approval eventually by the FDA and other regulatory bodies. But when you're training as a medical student and taking care of patients, that's not even a concept on the radar.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's this disconnect.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the hurdles we need to try to overcome as a community working together to take those discoveries, amazing discoveries, and make an impact for patients.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's, I trained with a guy that has done 600 phase 1 clinical trial. I mean, he's just amazing.
Yes.
And, been the first doctor to treat people with a drug for the first time. And I got to watch probably 100 new drugs enter the clinic while I was working with him. And it was amazing to watch. But he was one of the handful of people that really could do that bridge, that translation. And it's something that, just like you said, in the lexicon of what we do, it's, we do the science, we do the work in the lab. And like you said, the ultimate goal is just kind of contribute to the body of knowledge, right? To increase our understanding. And then we hope that somehow that there's something that bridges that to say, okay, now we can apply that and make a new medicine. But we don't really train people on how to do the thing in between. And some of us just kind of fumble around and try to figure stuff out. Right. But it is one of those things that is been really challenging. And I think, when we look at the progress that we've made in terms of understanding what we know now today versus when I started 30 years ago, being a cancer, when I really started being a cancer researcher, it's tremendously different, like what we know about cancer.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's still unfortunate. We have friends and loved ones and, patients that you see. A lot of these people are being treated with the exact same stuff 30 years ago that we were treating. So, I think there's an urgency and a feeling that we can't just keep doing what we're doing. We have to start making some changes of how we do things. And I think there's a lot of, obviously what we do is expensive. And that's probably one of the biggest limitations in developing medicines is that it costs a lot of money. And part of the reason it costs so much is that we are fumbling around in the dark a little bit.
Right.
And we have to, a lot of the stuff that we do doesn't work. And so the failures are actually more common than successes by a long ways.
Yeah.
And I tell everybody that we put the in research, right? Because we're redoing things over and over and over again. We're constantly trying to find the right path forward, and it's a real challenge. But like I said, I think that it's this field, not just in cancer, but just drug discovery and development in general, is selects for people that have a belief that we can actually do this. And you kind of have to have that passion and that optimism. And I mean, I wake up every day thinking today could be the day that I make a discovery that changes the world. And that's the cool thing about what we do is that if we do discover something, it really does change the world. I mean, it changes people's lives individually, but it changes the world.
I mean, I know I know you've had this experience in several of your drugs and even your current trials, and we're starting to have this too within our own company, right? It's a phase 1, first in human trial. But we're starting to see some responses, right? And for instance, we have a patient with metastatic pancreatic cancer, right? And you've worked with worst of the worst, right? Metastatic tumors growing, spreading throughout her body, out of options, goes on our trial, our drug that we developed, invested money, time, effort, all of the process. And within 2 months, all of her tumors disappear. And then we hold our breath. 4 months later, still gone. 6 months, 8 months. Now she's starting her 10th month of therapy. And you think, oh my God, what does this mean for this woman and for her family and even with stable disease? And so it is so satisfying to know because you and your team and you believed in yourself, right? You didn't take no for an answer. You kept going. You picked yourself up. You kept going. And what could be more important than saving lives?
It really, if you have to get up every morning and go to work, saving lives is a pretty good thing to do. And it's very motivating. And I think most people that I find in our industry, in both, on the medicine side, but certainly even on the drug discovery, I know the pharmaceutical business gets a lot of bad press and a bad rap, and there's probably good reasons for that. But I think the individuals that work in this field, if you ask them why they do it, it's for that reason, right? I want to change I want to save people's lives.
At our board meetings for Peel, we try to have patient or family come in every time to start it off, just so people understand why we're doing what we're doing.
It's not an abstract thing. This is real. Like these are real people.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Josh, I wanted to, you and I have spent a lot of time in the lab. You said you don't treat patients anymore, that you spend most of your time doing research. So if you were to Google Josh Schiffman or Dr. Joshua Schiffman, you would find something unusual about, Josh has actually done work. We do a lot of modeling in animals that are usually mice and rats and things. If you Google Josh Schiffman, you're going to find a reference to elephants, and it's like, elephants and cancer, where did that come from? And so why don't you tell people a little bit about your work that you did and what the impact of that has and how that's led to some of the things that you're working on now?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for the opportunity to talk a bit about that. So it goes back to, I was 15, I had cancer. Grew up, became a pediatric cancer doctor, became fascinated with this idea. Why did I get cancer? Why do all my patients, these kids, they're not exposed to alcohol or cigarettes? Why are they getting cancer? And then even, why did my dog die of cancer? So it was very focused on the genetics. What's going on? This is why I moved to Utah, right? Because the genetics here is so strong to study and research. And so it was focused. Who's getting more and more cancer? Well, I was at a lecture, and this was over 10 years ago, and the speaker was explaining that elephants almost never get cancer. I thought I was in the wrong side. I got up to leave. I said, no, sit down, Schiffman. You're in the right spot. I said, well, what are we talking about? Elephants. I came here to learn about cancer. I said, well, it's quite interesting. Elephants are 100 times the size of people. Yeah. That means they have 100 times as many cells. And every time a cell divides, chance for that cell to turn into cancer. Yeah. Well, that means if elephants weren't protected from cancer, they would all be dying of cancer at a young age. Look at it another way. A baby elephant is born after 22 months of being pregnant. 22 months in a row. Something, by the way, my wife says wouldn't be a good thing. Now, those elephants are born at 300 pounds. Also something my wife says wouldn't be a good thing. And they go, Dave, from 300 pounds to nearly 10,000 pounds in less than 10 years before they reach the age of reproduction. Yeah. But that means they're putting on 3 pounds of cellular growth per day, 3 pounds of cellular mass. Yeah. Just by chance alone, all of those elephants should be dropping dead of cancer before they could have their own baby elephants. But then what would happen? They'd go extinct.
That's right. There'd be no more elephants.
And I'm here, Dave, today on the Good Medicine podcast to tell you extinction is not a good strategy for survival.
I completely agree with that.
So elephants evolved. In order to be an elephant, there had to be some way of protecting from cancer. Anyways, this speaker who was explaining this went on to say that he and his students had sequenced or had looked at the sequence of the African elephant, and they found something pretty remarkable. Instead of 2 copies of a cancer protection gene called P53, and many of my patients are missing P53. Mm-hmm. This is one of the genetic predispositions for cancer called Li-Fraumeni syndrome. But instead of 2 copies, which humans normally have, elephants had 40 copies.
Incredible.
20 times as much. And then he went on to say he wasn't sure if this was the reason why elephants don't get cancer, but it certainly was very suspicious, right? Could very well be. So I was speaking to him afterwards, and I asked Dr. Maley, who made this initial discovery with Dr. Collin, his PhD student. I said, what would you say if I told you back in Utah, we're studying patients with Li-Fraumeni syndrome, we're looking at their blood, they're missing P53, they're always getting cancer, and you just said elephants with extra P53 almost never get cancer. What if somehow, some way, we could get some elephant blood, study it right next to the Li-Fraumeni blood, and really understand if that's why the elephants almost never get cancer? And he looked at me, Dave, and he said the magic words in academics. He said, Josh, if you can do that, I'd say we'd put your name on the paper.
Oh, nice.
I said, well, you had me at co-author.
That's
Dr.
right.
Mann.
Yeah, that's right.
He said, how are you going to do it? I said, no idea. It's a much longer story. Again, probably good for another podcast, but ended up at the zoo with my kids a few weeks later. And I was thinking about the elephants and the blood and how are we going to do this. And the elephant keeper doing the elephant show actually explained that once a week they take blood from the elephants to make sure that they're healthy. And that was it. That was the show. So if you have any questions, I'll be up front. So immediately I did what I had to do. I went right up front. I ditched my kids.
Of course.
And I said, Eric, the elephant keeper, I'm Josh, the pediatric cancer doctor. I've got a question for you. He said, oh, we've heard all the questions. What's your question? I said, how do I get me some of that elephant blood? And that began a very long collaboration, still ongoing, with the Utah Hogle Zoo, which is only a mile from the Huntsman Cancer Institute where the lab was. And so once a week, our study coordinators would go down, and instead of getting patient blood from the hospital, they'd get the elephant blood. We brought it back to the lab. This was led by Dr. Lisa Beglin, who's a PhD, who actually had come from the biotech world previously. So she had this thinking, this mindset of, okay, how could this eventually help people? And we figured out how this elephant P53 work. It actually is a remarkable, even molecule per molecule, it works better. And now, how did this lead to biotech and Peel? Well, I was actually giving a talk. I was in Israel for the first time, and my future co-founder was in the audience, Dr. Avi Schroeder. Now, Avi trained with Bob Langer. Okay. Bob Langer is a big name.
Big name,
right? He does. Yeah. It started Moderna, or co-founded Moderna, does lipid nanoparticles. But this was pre-COVID, so no one knew what nanoparticles were. Yeah. And Avi's in the audience. I'm talking about these elephants with their P53 that works better than human P53. And I finished the talk, Dave, the way I usually do, which is, oh, if only there was a way to take from the elephant and give to the people. Think of what we could do. We could prevent cancer. We could treat cancer. But that's impossible. Science fiction. Yeah. Could never happen.
Never happen, yeah.
So Avi, who I hadn't met yet, wrote down on his piece of paper, need to meet Dr. Schiffman, me, to learn about the elephant cancer-fighting protein to put into our nanotechnology. Then Avi spoke. I was blown away. This guy could deliver anything, anywhere, anytime in the body. I wrote down on my piece of paper, need to meet Dr. Schroeder to learn about his nanotechnology to put our elephant P53 inside. We started talking during the break, and that was kind of the aha moment. We said, look, we could stay in academics, but that's going to take 20 to 30 years and hundreds of millions of dollars. And no matter how good you are at writing NIH grants, it's too long. I have patients who are dying today. Right? We need this medicine now. He says, okay, let's start a biotech company. Let's do this. And he said, all right, yeah, that makes sense. Your technology, my background in medicine, science, let's bring this together. He said, Josh, we're going to need a name for the biotech company. I said, that's right, Avi. What's the Hebrew word for elephant? He said, the Hebrew word is Peel, P-E-E-L. I said, what do you think about Peel Therapeutics? He said, I love it. So do I. Peel was born.
That's where it was born.
That's where it came from.
Nice.
Now, it turns out, Dave, probably not surprisingly, it's a lot harder to deliver an elephant cancer protein to the body with a lipid nano. So we're still working on it. We've had some failures. We've had some successes back and forth, and we're still doing it in collaboration with the Huntsman Cancer Institute. And again, this is what we were talking about. How do you navigate that, right? Working with tech transfer offices at university, licensing, and it was a whole new world that no one had ever taught me in med school before, right? You sort of learn as you go. But the other thing that became clear to us is it's not just elephants, right? If you look around nature, there are all of these evolved cancer defense mechanisms and other disease defense mechanisms. Even plants, our lead asset now, the woman who we're talking about with pancreatic cancer is from a tree called the happy tree, camptothecin, which you know very, very well.
Yeah, that's right.
And so that's really what we do in Peel. We look to see how has nature solved disease, and then how do we use our science and engineering to deliver it as new medicines.
No. BioHive is a nonprofit building the future of healthcare innovation right here in Utah. As one of the nation's fastest growing life science industries, they bring together scientists, entrepreneurs, students, and companies to create breakthroughs that save lives and strengthen our economy. Whether you're in a lab or at a startup, BioHive is here to build, brand, and bring together a thriving life science community, and there's a place for you. Learn more, get involved, and see their latest happenings at biohive.com. That's amazing. What a great story. And I mean, it's just, every discovery has a really interesting story behind it. And it never ends up where you think it's going to end up either. Right. And I think that's the fun thing about science is you start with an idea, and the best scientists just go with it. They wherever it takes you, you end up in a different place. But I mean, that's one of the, it's like unraveling a mystery. Yes. It's a lot of fun, and that's been my experience. It's another thing that is a motivator for you is you just what's the next turn the next page and find out what the next thing's going to happen, what's going to happen. So you and I also share a passion for something that I think over the past 15 years or so, we've learned a lot about our own immune system and the importance of our immune system in regulating and preventing disease, but our own immune system plays a role in disease as well. And I think that if you would have told me when I first started, once again, you and I are about the same age. When we were first in school, that's when HIV was really scary. Like, we were worried, is HIV going to kill everybody in the world? Here's a virus that destroys your immune system and it kills you. And so lots and lots of money got poured into HIV research. In fact, at one point in time, I think for a few years, we were spending more on HIV than we were on cancer and heart disease.
Right.
And people are like, wow, that's kind of crazy. But what we learned from it was a lot about our immune system. And, back in those days, we knew we had T cells and B cells, but we didn't know the intricacies of how all those cells work together. And especially the idea, we always think of our immune system as our best friend, right? It's protecting us from, things that are going to kill us. But as we get older, I think what we started to realize is a lot of these diseases, including cancer, have a immune role that actually is a bad thing, that our own immune system is doing bad things for us.
Right.
And tell us a little bit about your research, and I can tell you a little bit about what I'm working on as well, because I think we're working on similar things.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. So, and I'll tell you a personal story, which you may or may not know about how my immune system turned on me again because of the it's all related, right? So I'm so fascinated, taking a step back, by studying animals, especially animals with extreme longevity, right? This is bowhead whale lives 200 years.
Yeah.
Naked mole rat lives 30 years. Regular rat lives 3 years. That would be like if you or I lived 700 years. I don't know if that's a good thing or not.
I'm not sure.
But right, there's something in these animals' immune system that allows them to do that. And that is really, I believe, and our scientists are beginning to support this, is, changes in their risk for cancer, right? Cancer resistance and inflammation resistance, right? So they've got some type of immunosuppressive way, because aging, right, all the problems we see with heart disease, kidney disease, metabolic disease, as you know, and I want to hear the latest because it's so exciting every time we talk, Dave, is, what diseases does inflammation lead, and how can blocking inflammation play a role in that? And certainly cancer, we're learning, and of course I think there's going to be the microbiome contributes to that, but it's the microbiome contributing to inflammation,
That's
right? And that's why personally we feel like there's this early onset cancer, this wave happening across the world now, and it may be related to diet and microbiome, but then inflammation.
Yep.
Now, for me personally, this became really evident just a few years ago. So I mentioned 35 plus years ago, I had radiation therapy. I had mantle, so chest radiation therapy. And that was great because it got rid of the cancer. I was part of an experiment of actually, let's not give any chemo, let's just give high-dose radiation and see what happened. Yeah. Well, that experiment failed, right? They decided ultimately, let's not do that anymore because the side effects are actually too harsh. And a couple of years ago, I actually was discovered to have very severe atherosclerosis. And I actually required a triple bypass open heart surgery.
Incredible. Yeah.
And that was before the age of 50.
Yeah.
Now, that was entirely from the inflammation from my immune system reacting to the radiation, right? And because this is what you're doing, that if we could figure out a way to block that inflammation, we could have much bigger, as we say, therapeutic window. Our drugs would work better without the toxicity associated with them. So, from causing cancer itself to preventing the toxicities from cancer and even the diseases of aging, looking at these inflammatory pathways, like you said, sometimes they're your friends, but sometimes they're not.
Not so much, yeah.
So tell me what you've been doing. I can't wait to hear. It's so exciting every time we talk.
So I think we've come to kind of that same conclusion that for years we've been trying to figure out, the same thing you were asking earlier is why do some people get cancer and other people don't? And why do some people get heart disease and other people don't? And it's not just... We know there's a genetic component to it. There's underlying risk that's associated with our genes. We're different, obviously. We look different. We're different heights, and But that
both good looking.
Yes, both very
Clearly.
good looking. Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't explain all of it. In fact,
Right.
it probably just explains a little bit of it as the more that we dig into it. And so, the environmental factors that influence disease is something that we've been very interested in for years. And we started to get some clues. I had mentioned earlier, part of cancer therapy is moved towards, our old school therapy was, just bombard the heck out of cancer cells and try to kill them as fast as we possibly can. And then we started to realize part of the response to even that type of therapy, the immune system plays a big role in that. And so we've tried to figure out how do we manipulate the immune system to see cancer as a bad thing and to attack cancer. And as you said, there's side effects associated with that as well. And so there's this, with our own immune system, you're just always walking this thin line, right? Because too much is bad, too little is bad. So it's that Goldilocks. We just have to have just right. And keeping that balance is really, really hard. And when I had my professor hat on, I used to teach in medical school, and we would teach students that chronic inflammation, which we always just said chronic inflammation is the failed resolution of acute inflammation. You have an inflammatory response that just never goes away, and that's what chronic inflammation is. We started to realize that it's a little different than that. It's not necessarily that, you sprained your ankle and that for whatever reason that inflammation never went away and that's chronic inflammation. That's not exactly what chronic inflammation is. So as you know, we've talked a little bit about what I work on now. We discovered a family that had a genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, which we're starting to realize is an inflammatory disease. It's something that when the brain has inflammation, you're in big trouble. So we found these people were at very high risk for developing Alzheimer's, but we found within a family that had this risk, there were individuals that seemed to be protected. And we found that they had a genetic variant in this family that protected them. And we said, oh my goodness, what could this be? And when we started to study this, it wasn't just Alzheimer's they were protected. They were protected against heart disease and cancer. Yeah. And so we're like, my goodness, we may have found something that opens up, the holy grail of what we've been looking for. So for the past 7 years, that's really what I've been dedicated to, is just trying to figure out this genetic clue. So very similar to your story, where there was a genetic clue that said, hey, having 40 copies of this gene might be good for cancer. We found having less of this gene might be good, and what we discovered is it has a direct effect on inflammation. So we found a new way to actually, we think, in a more directed and more specific way to suppress the chronic inflammation and to leave the acute response alone, because we want that. We have an infection, we have, something bad that's happened to us. Our immune system's there to help the healing process. We don't want to affect that. But as far as we can tell, there's really nothing good about chronic inflammation. Like I can't find a natural process that having chronic inflammation actually helps. I think it only hurts us. So we figured out, that there are players in this pathway, and we've now developed drugs to target several of them. And so we have clinical trials being run right now in patients that have diseases that we know are strongly influenced by inflammation. And we just, we haven't talked for a little while, but we just got clinical data to show that we have real activity in a disease where inflammation in our bone marrow. So if you get inflammation in your bone marrow, you quit making blood. And that's not a good thing.
No, it's not. Yeah.
Your body wants to make blood. It needs to make blood, and it tries to find other ways to make blood if you take that away. But the bottom line is that we were able to show that if you can eliminate that inflammation, your body bounces back pretty quickly and can actually start making blood again. And so we have patients that have a disease called myelodysplastic syndrome.
MDS.
And when they have myelodysplastic syndrome, the way we first treat them is we just give them transfusions. It's like, you can't make blood, we'll just give you more. We'll give you more blood. And that may be satisfying for a week or two, but it gets old really fast, and it's not good for the patient. I think there's lots of studies that have been shown the more transfusion you take, you shorten your life. And there's a lot of people excited about taking young blood and putting it in old people. But all the studies show the more transfusions you have, it's actually not a positive thing. And so these people's quality of life is terrible. And the initiation of that disease is all driven by inflammation. So we've been able to show we can actually block that. And when we block it, they start making blood again. So their stem cells that give rise to their blood cells start to differentiate properly, and they start to increase their blood counts, and they don't have to have transfusions anymore. And what's probably the coolest thing that we've seen in this study, and it's not done yet, and so we don't have definitive proof, but we have good signal to say, that it looks like that their quality of life gets better as well. So you think about, if you have, not only are you anemic because you're not making blood, but you feel lousy because you just have all this inflammatory signaling that's being pumped out into your body. So we're super excited about the early, and like I said, super early disclaimer, that we haven't proven anything yet, but we feel very excited and confident that this mechanism is going to lead to new therapies. And what I'm most excited about, because I think one of the things that I've learned in all these years of doing this is the best way to treat a lot of these diseases is to never get them, right?
Yes, it's correct.
That if we could get rid of the environment that these diseases grow in. So if I could have blocked your inflammation so that you didn't get heart disease, you wouldn't have had to have a triple bypass.
Exactly right.
So that is the ultimate goal, right? Is that somehow if we can come up with, if we understand, we're starting to peel back those layers to say, hey, maybe this is possible. In the old days, we used to think, you can't put too much pressure on the immune system because we need it. We can't suppress it. And we know that's true because if we completely suppress it, bad things happen. So there's that Goldilocks, that exact, just right amount of keeping this turned off. And, I don't think we have all the solutions, but at least we have a light now that says, hey, this might work. This might really work. And if we can do that, we can start, there's evidence out there that if you can suppress inflammation, you could potentially stop lung cancer.
Right.
You could potentially stop, pancreatic cancer is a hugely inflammatory cancer.
So I will say, full disclosure, I'm fine now after the bypass, but I much would have preferred to take a pill and avoid the whole adventure. So do you think that you have a cancer prevention pill?
What if you could get rewarded just for being healthier? Meet Galvin, the company using the latest blockchain technology to reward you for taking care of yourself. They help with your mind, body, and soul like a personalized health assistant to track your progress and help you feel better. Galvin's G Plus app rewards you for exercise and assesses your mental health in under a minute using AI and over 2,500 voice biomarkers. If you're feeling off, G Plus gives you personalized power-ups, science-backed techniques to help you feel better fast. And here's the best part. When you prioritize your wellness, you earn crypto. Ready to level up your health? Use promo code GOODMED20 at checkout for 20% off. Download G Plus today at the Apple app or Google Play Store and start your wellness journey with Galvin.
Something that everyone will take once a day
it's really,
for the rest of their lives.
It's a great question, and I think I'm not bold enough to say that I have but I think it's possible. I think that we might have something that we could take the highest risk people, like your Li-Fraumeni patient, which we should do, by the way.
We let you talk about doing a study. Well, after the podcast, we'll talk about that.
Because, we know that these people are going to get cancer, and they get multiple cancers, and they will die. And it's all inflammatory. Because they have the genetic insult that puts them on the road, but what takes them down the road is the inflammatory process. And I think that in fact, this is one of those moments. We should write it down that, Josh should talk to Dave and I should talk to Josh because, why not? Right. I mean, what else do we have for these people? You said these, sarcomas are things they get all the time, and we got nothing for these.
I've been at a conference, I've been many Li-Fraumeni conferences year after year. I mean, these are my people. I care so much about them and what they go through. But I've been at a conference where a woman in the audience, a patient, we always bring the patients and the doctors and the researchers together, which is why I think we've made so much progress in this particular area with screening and so on. But a woman who said, I've had 7 cancers, different cancers, not relapse, 7 different primaries. Cancers, And she said, she was our age, and she said, I can't sleep at night because I'm afraid if I close my eyes, the next cancer is going to develop. And she's not wrong. And these cancers sometimes affect children. And so they are in need. They are clamoring for something, and because they know the stakes are high. But yes, let's write it down and let's talk, because I think this is a population that certainly could, the highest risk that could benefit.
And it is the best place to start, right? If this is something that really could work, let's take the people that are at the highest risk and see if we can change their trajectory. If we can do it with those people, we should be able to do it with everybody.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's sort of the way that screening mammography got introduced, right? You start with the highest risk cancer, people with BRCA1, BRCA2, and if that works in there, then you can think about who in the general population could benefit.
Yeah, no, I think and so those are the ways, and this is why it's great to be able to talk to each other, and why science is a team sport. It really is. I think that we don't. None of these things are made in none of these discoveries are made in isolation. We have to, if you wouldn't have heard that talk, with the guy talking about elephants again, you would have never known, right? And you would have never made the connection to say, oh, well, what if I did this? You know. So it's important. And I love the idea of having this podcast as well, because we put information out there. We'll get people, I'm sure that somebody with Li-Fraumeni is going to listen to this and say, I'll volunteer.
Sign me up,
Sign me up. But I think that's how big breakthroughs are made. And that's what's exciting, is that we come together and we come up with new ideas that I couldn't have thought on my own and you wouldn't have thought on your own. And that's what I love about science, is that I never know what the end of the day is going to be like at the beginning of the day. And I mean, it's funny that we just kind of flippantly talked about that, but we really should do something like this. I mean, it would be very exciting.
We will do something.
We'll do it. That's right.
Dave,
why not? I mean, at the end of the day, what's the worst thing that could happen is that it wouldn't work, and which is what they're dealing with today, right? So, but we have pretty good evidence that So to go back to your original question, do you think that I think it's entirely possible, and maybe there's a lot of work that we need to do, because I really do believe that getting it just right is really the hard part about this. That I think as a drug developer, we tend to just say, let's just put as much pressure as we can. Let's give that drug every day, twice a day, 3 times a day is even better, but maybe it's once a week. Maybe it's once a month. Maybe you just reset this mechanism every now and then.
Yeah, enough.
And, so that you don't have to worry about, am I suppressing the immune system too much? Because as we mentioned, you can go too far the other way, and then you have a different set of problems. And in fact, cancer is probably on both sides of those things. We know that, right? If one of the things we mentioned, HIV patients, they lose T cells. What happens when you lose T? You get cancer, right? And anyway, so I think there's some really exciting new things that we're starting to learn more about how our own body deals with these things, and I think that I'm a big believer that our healing process, really what we try to do as physicians and scientists is eliminating things that allow our body to heal itself, because our body is our best. The best medicine we have is right here in our own body.
So you talk about good medicine, right? So that is something when we're residents and we rotate through in pediatrics and we rotate through the intensive care, the pediatric, the PICU. Really, what we're taught, the mantra again and again, is just stand out of the way. Yeah. Right. We just have to. The body will heal itself. We just have to give it enough time and enough space to do that. That's truly the best medicine. Is just stand back.
I think that's exactly right. And so I think maybe that's a good way to end this. Is that we're talking about good medicine. The best medicine that we have is, and I think the best medicines that we have really work by letting our body heal itself, and at the end of the day, I think that's what it's all about. And it's exciting doing what we're doing. We love what we're doing, and every day, like I said, I'm motivated. I'm excited that for the work that you're doing. I don't see anybody in our field. I never see anybody as a competitor. I see we compete against cancer. We compete against diseases, and I wish you all the best in everything that you're trying to do, and anything that we can do together, I'm all in. So you heard it here first. That we came up with an idea that we're actually going to do this. We're going to make this happen.
Listen, my view and what I strongly believe and learned throughout, takes a village, right?
It really does.
Nobody can do this on their own, and it takes the different ideas, and that's what makes it so exciting. Like you said, this is what gets us out of bed in the morning, and is so sometimes we stay up all night because we're so excited by this. But yeah, it's the community and the other scientists and physicians and the patients and all working together to make it. What can be better? What can be better?
No, that's exactly right. Well, thank you so much, Josh. It was wonderful. Sit down. We should do this more often.
I look forward to it.
I always enjoy our time together. So thank you so much for coming on the Good Medicine podcast, and thanks for listening.
Yeah.
And hopefully you learned some today. Thank you.
All right.
That's it for today's episode of Good Medicine. Thanks for joining us as we explore the science and stories behind health, medicine, and innovation. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a great zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please click, follow, and leave a review for the podcast on Apple and Spotify. If you have questions or comments for me, please put them in the comments section on YouTube or reach out on all social media platforms at Good Medicine. Links are in the description. The best way to support the podcast is to check out the sponsors of the show. You can do this by looking at the links in the show notes. That's it for today. I'm Dr. David Beers, and we'll see you next time.